Welcome everyone to our fourth Fair Trade Explorer meeting. Um, we have started these as a way for us to explore, obviously explore fair trade. So tonight we have something very special planned for you. Um, and we're actually going to explore lots of different things about fair trade. So just to introduce myself, my name is Patrick Lynch. I am the Outreach and Education Coordinator here at Just Creations. And I will tell you, I couldn't be more proud of these six young women who are going to be speaking to you tonight. I am the facilitator of this program called Fair Trade Ambassadors, and they have done an amazing job this year of everything that they were asked to do. So what are we doing tonight? Agents of Change. Joan Frizz, our executive director, and I thought that this was an apt title of what we were doing tonight. Part of their commitment as being a fair trade ambassador is that they have to give presentations about different aspects of fair trade. So before we do that, I think it's also important perhaps that we just do a little review. I think there are a lot of new faces that I see, and since we're going to be talking about several different areas and facets of fair trade, maybe it's good that we just start with the same foundation of where to begin. So fair trade is an alternative trading system, and it's set up to provide sustainable employment opportunities for artisans and farmers in the developing world. And when we say sustainable employment, we mean fair pay, safe working conditions, opportunities for women, which is very important in places where those opportunities for employment, especially if you're a single mother, is sometimes next to nothing. It means care for the environment, no child labor. And these actually are some of the subjects that you're going to learn about tonight as our ambassadors are talking. So for some of you, what is a fair trade ambassador? This is a program that was started back in 2007. And I don't want to put Joan on the spot, but maybe she could just talk about how it began, and then I can talk about sort of what they do and what their commitments are.
I'm on vacation, Patrick.
I know you're on vacation, but you're so much better at talking about the beginning and the
so we started the ambassador program to focus on high school, specifically with high school juniors, because they're not seniors and they're mature enough. They're not too young. They're mature enough to handle the subject matter and to assimilate it and help be a program advocate and a fair trade advocate to their peers. So it started when we didn't get a grant. Actually, the idea was originally developed through a grant application. We didn't get the grant. We decided once we had a full-time education coordinator to add the program and see what we could do with it. So now we're in our 17th year. What is that? Is that right, Pat?
Yeah, yeah. I think this is years? 16 years. I think
it's a lot of years.
This is the 12th, 13th class.
Okay.
I don't. But how these six individuals got here is kind of what I'm better at. So back in the fall, because of COVID, in a normal world, I would go to their schools and give a presentation talking about what the program is and why they should do it. This past year, because of COVID, I sent out videos, I did some Zoom calls, I did everything I could to still do the same thing. And interestingly enough, this past year, at least in my tenure, we got more applicants than we ever had. At least in my count. Joan might be able to tell us that in the beginning there were more, but in my tenure, these were the most applicants we ever had. And these six young ladies are the ones that were chosen. And how they got there is that they filled out an application. They came for an interview, and honestly, in my opinion, these 6 young ladies were the top 6 all along. And if there are any parents here or even sponsors, you all should be very proud of that. But what does an ambassador do once you're chosen? So they learn. We meet monthly because of COVID. You know, this year we've done in person, we've done over Zoom, but we meet monthly for learning sessions, and each of those nights generally has a different subject around it. One night we talked about child labor. One night we talked about the environment. This year, actually, one night we talked about COVID and how that has affected different artisan groups. And the way that I present that is that I present material and then we discuss. I figure they're coming from school, they get enough lecture. I'm not somebody who lectures, so I like to present material so that they can come to their own conclusions. They get to plan. There are 3 days through the year. There is International Women's Day, Earth Day, and World Fair Trade Day. And in the past, the ambassadors would take one of those days and plan it. This year, we decided to have what we called Fair Trade Ambassador Day. And all 6 of them teamed up in teams of 2 to plan around that particular day. But we did it all in one day. And it was spectacular. They did an amazing job of presenting the material that they had planned. They get to volunteer. Part of their responsibility is that they have to volunteer at least twice a month. And then the last thing is they get to teach, which is why we're here tonight. Part of their commitment is that they have to give a presentation about some aspect of fair trade. And it used to be to their school or church, but we thought that it would be very appropriate that they should be giving their presentations here. The Fair Trade Explorer program really has come out of the Fair Trade Ambassador program. In the past, when I know since I've been here, would talk to adults, volunteers, and talk about what ambassadors are doing, they say, well, why can't I do that? So this is kind of how the ambassador program has started. So I think it's very appropriate that they are here. So having said that, I'm going to introduce each one of them to you, and they're going to reintroduce themselves once they start speaking. First, we have Ella Bean. She is from Sacred Heart Academy. We have Emma Ellison. She is from Assumption. Catherine Emmerich. She is from Mercy. Natalie Hoffman is from Mercy. Catherine Squires is from Mercy. And then we have Halen Ware, who is from Sacred Heart. They have chosen the focus and the subject matter that they are going to talk about. This is the place they've journeyed for this whole year, and this is the place of passion, I believe, that they have come to, and sort of a platform that they want to share their passion for fair trade. The overarching goal, I believe, of the Fair Trade Ambassador Program is to take our ambassadors from ambassadors to lifelong advocates of fair trade. So I hope that as we go through the evening, you will be as proud as I am of what they have done. So the plan for the evening, this is how it's going to work. Each of them gets 10 minutes to speak. They're very nervous, but I know they're going to do just amazing. There will be questions at the end. If you have any questions, there will be a time after all 6 of them have spoken. So if you want to type your questions in the chat so you don't forget, we'll come back and review those, which probably would be a good thing if there's something you want to ask somebody who has spoken earlier in the evening. And I will also share, they have actually chosen the order in which they want to speak. And, you know, in my mind, I was just going to draw randomly out of a hat, but they have negotiated with each other a logical way that they can speak so that each one in context makes sense with each other. So, are you ready, girls? Without further ado, we are going to start with Miss Ella Bean.
Hi guys, I'm going to share my screen real quick.
Stop my share. All right, go ahead.
Oh, sorry.
No, you're fine. I had to stop mine.
Can everyone see that?
I can't. I can now.
Okay. Is everything, can everyone else, is it good? Okay. Hi, like Patrick said, my name is Ella Bean, and I'm doing my presentation on the use of child labor in the textile industry. So the term child labor is defined by the International Labor Organization as work that deprives children of their childhood, their potential, and their dignity, and that is harmful to physical and mental development. It refers to work that is mentally, physically, socially, or morally dangerous and harmful to children. Forms of child labor include slavery or similar practices, child trafficking, forced recruitment into armed conflict, prostitution and pornography, drug production and trafficking or other illegal acts, debt bondage, hazardous work that can cause injury or moral corruption. There are 152 million child workers worldwide between the ages of 5 and 17 years old, estimated, that's an estimated number, that are involved in child trafficking. And the way that these numbers are distributed is there is 72.1 million children that are victims to child labor in Africa, 62.1 million in Southeast Asia and the Pacific, 10.7 million in the Americas, 5.5 million in Europe and West and Central Asia, and 1.2 million in the Middle East. And all of these numbers are child labor in general, not just geared to the fashion industry, but I will be talking about children in the textile industries from this point forward. So why child labor? Many factories use child labor because it is the source of cheap labor and low wages. When larger brands are looking for factories to source their products from, they're looking for a factory that's going to give them cheap prices and relatively good quality products that they can sell to consumers. And children are a great way to have low wages and cheap labor because they are not as inclined to ask and fight for a more fair wage. Also, poverty promises. A lot of the children that work in these factories, they are in poverty, their families are in poverty. And a lot of times what happens is the factories will have traffickers that will go out into villages or high places, communities with a high rate of poverty in them, and they will go to the children's parents and say, okay, if you send your child with me, then we'll make sure your child has food, we'll make sure they have comfortable living arrangements, we'll make sure that they are having like a great life here, and then in turn we'll give you this much allowance, we'll give you this much money per month so that you can support your family. So a lot of the children go to the factory because their parents need that money. Even though a lot of the parents don't want to send them, they do know that they need that money for their family, so the children go. But unfortunately, the promises are rarely fulfilled, so it kind of starts a cycle of the child labor, and it starts in the home. And also, children are notorious for being smaller than adults, obviously, and this helps a lot of factories because they find that children have an easier time catching threads, sewing things because their hands are smaller. Also, there have been many instances where children will go into the machinery if an adult can't get their hand in there, like in the little crevices, if something's wrong. And lastly, the stages of production. So a lot of brands say that they make sure that they do not use child labor, but the reality of it is if you're dealing with a large brand with multiple factories that are supplying their garments to them, it is very hard to catch every single factory that is using child labor, because a lot of times the factories will hide the kids while inspectors will come, because they're so small. So it's not that hard to hide them, and it's easier to miss them. And also it's hard for large brands to check every single factory because they have so many factories that they are working with. And now I have a story about child labor, so in the garment industry. So this is Bima. She is 15 now, but she was only 12 years old when she started working at her local garment factory in Bangladesh. She was driven to leave school and work when her father had an accident that prevented him from providing for her family. She worked squished between 20 other women for anywhere from 12 to 16 hours a day, and she only makes $1 a day, while she is making at least 460 pairs of pants for that day that add up to be $1.07 in US dollars, which is a little bit more than what she makes in a day. In addition, these pants that she is making are in a lot of the stores and are sent to a lot of the brands that we purchase from today. One of her quotes is that she misses school and says that she feels painful and her heart breaks when she thinks of not being able to go to school. She says all she dreams of now is being able to stand on her own feet. Unfortunately, her situation seems unimaginable to a lot of us, but it is very similar to other children in her community. Although we think that this is such a terrible, terrible thing, she actually says that she has it a lot better off than other children in her community. When she was in her interview, she told the interviewer that she feels so lucky to be at the factory that she's at because she said that her supervisor is very nice and does not abuse or exploit the workers that she is supervising like a lot of other factory supervisors do. Now that you have heard that story, I wanted to provide a couple of brands that have either had instances of using child labor or are known to use child labor. Some brands include H&M, Walmart, Victoria's Secret, Gap, Disney, and Forever 21. And there is a picture on the right that you can see some other brands. So I'll keep that up for a second. Okay. And so I wanted to provide you all with some ways to help prevent child labor. So the first is to purchase from brands that actively speak against child labor. This includes any fair trade brand that you can find at Just Creation, also Tom's and Patagonia. Also follow and support organizations that speak against child labor. Some examples are stopchildlabor.org or the International Labor Organization. They actually have a World Day against child labor every year. So if you are wanting to look into that, you can go onto their website and it says a lot about that. Also, writing letters of change to brands that are known to use child labor. A lot of times when you write letters to these brands, they might you might think that, oh, they're never going to read that. Like, it doesn't matter. But if you get a couple people together maybe and you all write letters, a lot of the brands are looking for ways to better themselves and to see what consumers want from them. And if a bunch of consumers are telling them, we're not going to buy from your brand if you don't do this, then they're more inclined to do it than if you were to not tell them. And also officiating strikes of known brands that use child labor. My freshman year, my theology teacher actually encouraged our class to do this. We watched a documentary of labor in the fashion industry and textile factories. And one of the points in the documentary was that child labor is used a lot in these factories. And the brand of choice that the documentary covered was H&M. So for, I think it was a month, my whole theology class had a strike of H&M and none of us would buy anything from there. And I have actually followed through with that till junior year just because of how prevalent the child labor is in H&M factories. And it is also just such a terrible thing that I didn't want to support. So that's also something to think about if you're willing to take the challenge. I know it's hard. And lastly, I want to leave you all with ways that fair trade impacts child labor. So everything that I am about to say is either paraphrased or quoted from UNICEF USA. So I did not want to take ownership for this and these points. So the first point that I have is that fair trade reduces poverty. Small-scale factory workers who receive fair wages can better provide for their families, send their children to school, and avoid the cycles of poverty that put children at risk for exploitation and trafficking. Second, we have fair trade and their rules of morality. The Fair Trade's internationally agreed fair trade standards help farmers and workers tackle poverty on their own terms. The standards encourage long-term relationships and fair contracts for farmers and employers. They require employers to protect the basic rights of the people they employ through providing decent working conditions, paying wages that reflect allowance for the country's basic living expenses, and most importantly, prohibiting child labor. Next, we have strict inspection. Qualified auditors inspect fair trade producers on a regular basis and pay special attention to certain areas and products where child labor is a risk. Fair trade suspends or decertifies the producer or organization where child labor is found until protective and corrective measures are put in place. I especially like this one because the fair trade always gives second chances, or usually they give second chances. So I think that's a great way to breaking the cycle is having like the 3 strikes you're out rule, kind of, if you want to call it that, and allowing someone to fix the problem. Because if the fair trade organizations were just to say, oh, you have child labor, you're out, we're not going to help you, then the factory would be like, oh, okay, now I can keep using the cheap labor. So I think it's great. This is my favorite point just because it's all about bettering the factories, not just giving them rules, expecting them to follow through, and then if they don't, kind of cutting them off. It's really about building relationships, which is a huge part in stopping the spread of child labor. Next, we have guidelines for child labor and forced labor guidelines. If child labor is detected, fair trade takes immediate action to address it and to protect the children involved in accordance with fair trade's child labor and forced labor guidelines. Additionally, fair trade producer organizations are required to establish partnership with local civil society organizations and child rights organizations to prevent situations of abuse or exploitation and ensure children do not become victimized. And finally, we have fair trade requiring youth-inclusive community-based monitoring and remediation programs with organizations that are involved with fair trade. Finally, fair trade works with communities to set up youth-inclusive community-based monitoring, that's a hard word, and remediation programs to help people take charge of issues around child labor. Children, young people, and adults are at the heart of the program and identify potential and or actual risk of children's well-being and make recommendations on how to respond. So I really hope that this presentation helped you learn more about child labor and fair trade. And I want to thank Patrick for sharing all of his slides on child labor. We had a presentation at one of our fair trade learning sessions about child labor, and it really encouraged me to do my presentation on child labor. So I wanted to thank him. And that's all I have. Now I just have to figure out how to get back.
Thank you, Ella. Okay, so next we have Catherine Emmerich, and you're on, Catherine.
Hi, I'm gonna share my screen real quick. Okay, can you guys see this?
Yep.
All right, perfect. Okay, hi, my name's Catherine Emmerich. Like Patrick said, I'm a junior at Mercy, and today I'm going to be talking about if the question of the day, the question of the day is going to be, are big corporations preventing fair trade expansion? So, sort of like what Patrick started off with, I just wanted to make sure everyone was clear on what fair trade was exactly. And it just basically means that if you buy something that's fair trade, it means that the workers who made it are paid fairly and were working in safe environments when they made those things. Fair trade allows for ethical consumption of goods because it allows for workers to receive livable wages, and fair trade overall prevents the exploitation of workers. Now, what does fair trade have to do with big corporations? Big corporations are the companies that work towards selling to consumers in order to please the consumer and profit from those transactions. So, like, examples of big corporations include Apple, Google, Walmart, McDonald's, and so many more that we all buy from. So how do these two things coexist and how do they connect with one another? When it comes to companies making products, they make choices about how they want to produce what they're selling, and this is where fair trade comes in. Unfortunately, majority of big corporations and all the ones that I'm going to be talking about today have chosen to go down an unethical path to increase their profit. So big corporations usually do one of two things when it comes to fair trade. They either don't address fair trade or they use it as a slogan rather than actually practicing fair trade. Meaning they don't release information about how their products are made, and they ignore the possibilities of their unethical actions in hopes that people won't ask or find out. Or I mean that many companies such as Gap and Nestle have smaller branches of their companies that are strictly labeled as fair trade, while the majority of those companies actually profit from the exploitation of workers. They use these small fair trade sections of their companies to change the perception of the consumer in order to make people think that it's okay to buy from them. For example, Starbucks has a cafe program where they donate to fair trade programs and make promises that 100% of Starbucks' coffee would be ethically sourced, but fair trade only accounts for about 6% of all their coffee sales. So, coffee bean pickers in Nicaragua, for example, are not paid until the end of the seasonal work that they do, and they are often not paid in full. Pictured are young children waiting in line for their pay. Nike. For example, of a company who doesn't really address fair trade is Nike. In Vietnam, Nike workers have been found only making 20 cents an hour without breaks, working upwards of 50 hours a week. Over 68% of these workers are women, and many children also work in these factories. Nike has been caught with sweatshops and child labor numerous times, yet they continue making bad choices and trying to change certain things to minimize bad press. Pictured are the workers in Vietnam who are only paid about 20 cents an hour. Speaking of child labor, there are just some corporations who have been caught, like Ella said. These many corporations, many of us haven't heard about child labor that they use, and why is that? Where is the media coverage? Well, in a research study done by Pew Research Center, it was found that fair trade is categorized under miscellaneous, and they received less than 2.5% of airtime because fair trade has to share with all the other miscellaneous items. However, the economy had 5% of airtime, which brings up the question, why is America often focused more on economy rather than fair trade practices? Why are they always pit against each other? For a long time, the US has taken pride in its free trade economy, and consumerism has been at the heart of the United States' economy, and there is a very dangerous idea that is preventing the expansion of fair trade. Consumerism is about getting the newest, trendiest thing for the cheapest amount of money, and as Halen will talk about later today, fast fashion is a huge issue. That's why America will not address why fair trade is not being used, because of how much our economy benefits from not using fair trade. So how can we stop this dangerous idea that fair trade is not a practice that would benefit everyone? How can we prove that corporations using fair trade can benefit the economy while also benefiting men, women, and children in other countries, such as ourselves? The three things we really need to do are: 1, Big corporations need to know that consumers see their dangerous actions. If we don't hold corporations accountable, they will not improve these practices. If Nike wasn't caught using sweatshops, they wouldn't have stopped. This is because what companies are afraid of is losing business because of bad press, which is why boycotting is a very good practice to use when you are in a place to do so. The boycotting only works if multiple people do so, which is why educating others is huge. In my opinion, educating others is one of the biggest flaws that fair trade has so far. It is probably one of the biggest obstacles fair trade has to overcome. So please use your voice to help others learn what you know. I remember once I was talking to my friend about different companies that I wasn't going to buy from anymore, and I was getting super excited about it, and I was encouraging her to do so. And I remember her looking me dead in the eye and saying, "Catherine, I'm not going to change any of my practices." And that wasn't out of cruelty, it was out of ignorance. She didn't realize what those companies were really doing to other people. Which is why you need to choose your best options and support good brands. So, from the knowledge that you learn, show through your shopping habits which practices you want to support. All fair trade companies need and deserve your support. Like Ella said earlier, Tums and Patagonia are some great examples, and I really encourage you to do your own research whenever you can, and please shop as ethically as you are able to. Thank you. Here are all my resources.
Thank you, Catherine. Awesome job. So next, we have Catherine with a K, Catherine Squires.
Hello, I'm going to share my screen real quick. Sorry. Okay, so hi, my name is Catherine Squires, and tonight I will be presenting on consumer attitudes on fair trade and what they mean for the industry's future. So throughout my time as an ambassador, I found that everyone in the fair trade community is very supportive and committed to ethical practices, but I know that this isn't the case with everyone, which, as Catherine pointed out earlier, is largely due to ignorance. I like to think that if more people knew about fair trade, they would be more supportive. So I wanted to do some research to see if my ideas about this were correct. So the first thing I looked at was a study on eco-label preferences. And essentially, eco-labels are just little descriptors added to products that give you a little bit more on the history of where the product has been before you bought it. So things like fair trade, ethically made, organic, things like that. And this study focused on answering 3 different questions. We're going to focus on that first one, which is which eco-labels are preferred among American consumers. It's also worth noting that this article and the study were both done in the context of market research and focus on consumers rather than producers. While this focus on consumers is certainly not the goal of fair trade, it's actually quite the opposite. It's important to understand that fair trade operates in a largely capitalist Western economy, which inherently values the consumer. Thus, while fair trade strives to serve the producers, and often does, it has to balance with the wants and needs of consumers in order to be successful and survive. So we need to consider how changing consumer attitudes is crucial to spreading fair trade. So first, to talk about the format of the survey, this was sent out to 1,000 randomly selected individuals with instructions to have the person who buys the most food in the household with a family to fill out the survey. Participants were then asked to choose between 2 identical products with different eco-labels. The 5 that were tested in this study were humane, small scale, local, US grown, or living wage. They were also given the choice of neither in order to better simulate being in a real store. It is worth noting, however, that this choice did not include differences in pricing. The results of the study showed that people strongly preferred the label local or humane was the runner-up. That said, local is a broad label, and consumers who are not as interested in ethical shopping may have chosen it for other reasons like freshness, food safety, and desire to know where the food comes from. On the other hand, consumers who are more interested in ethical shopping may have chosen it because they know that there are better, more restrictive laws in the US that protect against pesticides, chemicals, and no child labor, things like that, which is not always something that you can know when your product comes from the other side of the world. And it's also worth noting that local was defined as being grown within a 50-mile radius of the place of purchase. Now, the results of this study, this isn't to say that consumers aren't interested in the other issues, like living wage or small scale. It's just to say that there was more interest in locally grown products. That said, this study has numerous limitations, which of course limit the value of its results. For example, the study acknowledges that it did not consider how much consumers are willing to pay for these labels, which is an important gauge of how much consumers are actually value ethics alongside their money. It would help gauge how many people are also able to even afford fair trade and organic products, because if you're trying to just make ends meet, fair trade products and organic products, which even if they're just slightly more expensive, probably aren't going to be your first choice. The study also did not compare the 5 labels that they tested to the label organic, because they believe that this would skew the results, as this label is more well known and widespread. And the final limitation of looking at these numbers now is that this study is from 2006. There aren't many studies like this since then. When combing through databases and online sources, I struggle to find surveys and studies on attitudes towards fair trade, leading me to believe that there still isn't much research on the impacts of fair trade in Western markets. Looking at these numbers now, I think a study done today would likely yield different numbers, as social media has highlighted some of these issues more in recent years. That said, I think that the theory discussed in this study and the implications of the results still have great value. I mentioned earlier that this study was conducted in the context of market research. The article also discusses how ethical consumerism is a newer, more popular form of political action, as it is available to an extent to everyone with little extra cost in time or money. As people become aware of the flaws in our economic system, which of course places producers at a disadvantage, they are faced with a choice. Political economist Albert Hirschman calls these options exit or voice. Exit involves breaking away from a company to by boycotting their goods, cutting off partnerships, etc., while voice involves expressing dissatisfaction directly to the company. While voice gives companies insight on their consumers' needs, it's not always taken seriously, as complaints might be the minority. As Hirschman suggests, the best examples of activism are where there is a balance of exit and voice, but unfortunately this often isn't the case. One way to balance these two tactics is through a strategy called boycott. This strategy involves supporting and buying from companies that have ethical practices while boycotting companies with unethical practices. This is different from just a boycott, as it involves sending companies positive signals through buying their ethical products. This is where eco-labels come into play to inform customers of the history of their product that they're buying. The most successful eco-labels are backed by a third-party certification, so that customers can be sure of the product's history. The results of this survey show that the term local has the best potential for success in the market, suggesting that fair trade or living wage, which was the term that they associated with fair trade, labels need more promotion to have a bigger impact on the market. A key part of this is education on the issues of free trade and unfair labor, and education on fair trade initiatives. I did find one more recent study from 2019, which was also gauging your attitudes specifically towards fair trade, and a brief analysis on their implications. The study was less detailed than the last one, but it did find that 69% of consumers trust the fair trade mark, and 75% of consumers associate fair trade with lifting producers out of poverty. It also found that coffee is the most popular fair trade product, as it is one of the most widespread, so think of like Heine Brothers. And it also found that most consumers believe that fair trade mark improves company images. And it's also worth noting that this was done not necessarily on a fully global scale, but it did include multiple nations aside from just the US, unlike the last study. This is all well and good, as we like to see that people are associating positive things with fair trade. However, we don't want to simplify fair trade to simply just being another form of charity, worse yet, emotional charity. If we lose focus of the goals of fair trade, we risk undermining its legitimacy as a sustainable option for change in developing communities. If it becomes simply a question of charity, it seems optional unless people are compelled to do it. So we have to conclude that education on fair trade is more than necessary for its survival, especially for those of us who are advocating fair trade. We need to know what we're talking about in order to push it more into the market. And of course, this goes back to what we were talking about earlier, and that we need to change consumer attitudes to increase the demand for fair trade products in order to pressure companies to expand their fair trade programs and actually commit to them. So these are the sources that I used, the surveys that I looked at and the data. And of course, I just want to say thank you so much to Patrick and Joan for running this program. Thank you to my sponsor, Miss Tracy Surratt-Howe, and thank you to all of you for allowing me to present tonight.
Thank you, Catherine. Awesome job. Next, we have Halen Ware.
Okay, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Can you all see this?
No.
Not yet.
No.
How about now?
Now we
There we go.
Okay, awesome. Sorry. All right. Hi, everyone. I'm Halen Ware, and I am a junior at Sacred Heart, as Patrick said. And today I will be talking about the impact of the fast fashion industry on the world and what we can do to combat it. So, what exactly is fast fashion? Fast fashion is cheap, trendy clothing that samples trends from the catwalk and celebrity culture and turns them into apparel at breakneck speed to meet consumer demand. Before fast fashion took over the clothing industry, brands usually introduced about 4 seasonal collections every year, and today, fast fashion brands produce about 52 micro seasons each year. And this culture of constant production and consumption has led to extreme overproduction of clothing, which has created prolific waste. The Swedish fast fashion brand H&M has alarmed investors last year by reporting $4.3 billion worth of unsold inventory on hand. This is an amount indicating that it was producing much more than it could sell. This overproduction can be seen among hundreds of brands, causing them to either throw away, burn, and even destroy extra inventory instead of discounting it, so as to not dilute the value of their garments. This is just one example of wastefulness in the fast fashion industry, which creates a huge impact on our environment. The average consumer is now purchasing 60% more apparel items compared to the year 2000, but each garment is kept half as long. 180 billion pounds of clothing ends up in landfills each year, and only 13% of clothing is recycled or donated each year. The United Nations Environment Program has reported that the fast fashion industry is responsible for about 10% of all global greenhouse emissions, and the industry consumes more energy than the aviation and shipping industries combined. Every second, 1 trash truck's worth of textiles is either burned or sent to a landfill. It takes 2,700 liters of water to make 1 cotton shirt, which is enough to meet the average person's drinking needs for 2.5 years. And making 1 pair of blue jeans produces as much greenhouse gas as driving a car for more than 80 miles. Textile dyeing is the world's 2nd largest water polluter, as extra dyes are dumped into bodies of water. Moving into the human impact, nearly 80 million people work in the garment industry worldwide. In Bangladesh, garment workers make about $96 per month, working 14 to 16 hours a day for 6 or more days a week. They need at least 3.5 times that amount to live a decent life with basic facilities. Workers also face detrimental health hazards, such as dust and smoke inhalation, musculoskeletal pain, as well as exposure to chemical fumes and dangerous electrical wires. Lives are being taken by the fast fashion industry as we speak. Just 8 years ago, in Dhaka, Bangladesh, the Rana Plaza factory tragedy took place. In a rush to build the garment factory and to begin mass producing clothing, the upper floors of the factory were built without a permit, and they were not designed to hold the weight of the heavy vibrating machinery that is necessary to mass produce all of these clothes. And on April 23rd, cracks began to appear on the walls of the lower level of the building. The building was evacuated, but then it was declared safe upon inspection, and workers were demanded to return back to work. The next day, April 24th, 2013, at 8:57 a.m., the building collapsed. 1,129 people died, and more than half of them were women. 2,500 people were injured, and some were stuck under the rubble for days. Many victims' bodies were never found, unfortunately. At the top left are pictures of the initial cracks in the structure, and the bottom left corner is the building before the collapse, and the bottom right picture is the building after the collapse. And at the top right corner, there are pictures posted by families offering rewards for their missing loved ones who were lost after the collapse. Rebecca is a woman who was devastated by the Rana Plaza tragedy. She worked at Rana Plaza making clothing for big brands such as Walmart, JCPenney, and many more. After the cracks were discovered, she was told that her bosses would take a month's pay from her if she didn't show up to work the next day. When the building collapsed, she was stuck under the rubble for 2 days. She lost a foot and a leg, as well as 6 family members, including her mother. Unfortunately, her mother's body was never found. She cannot walk, and she is completely dependent on her husband to carry her everywhere. She is unable to use her prosthetic limbs as she was not provided any resources on how to use them, and she feels that they are too heavy. Here are some quotes from Rebecca detailing her story. "One beam fell on my legs, and I was trapped. It was pitch black, and there was no air. I cried for my mother, but all I could hear were the cries of my friends. Several of their dead bodies were lying around me. Now I am stuck in this hut all day. I cannot go anywhere. What if something happens, like a fire? What if no one is around? How am I going to live now? Sometimes I don't want to." Now that we have learned about the extensive and heartbreaking impacts of the fast fashion industry, let's talk about what we can do to combat them. Nathan Reddy, a senior intelligence analyst at data analysis firm CB Insights, has said that brands won't go green on their own. I do think that a lot of sustainability is going to be driven by consumer demand. So in my opinion, it all comes down to making changes to your spending habits and where you decide to put your money. Consuming less in general is, in my opinion, the most effective way to reduce the amount of clothing that ends up in landfills, as it sort of nips the problem in the bud, if you will. Consuming less will drive down the massive demand placed on large corporations, and thus this will cause the company to lose money and ultimately be forced to produce less clothing in the first place to be sold. When purchasing clothing, look into the brands that you purchase from and invest in ethically produced and fair trade brands when possible. Investing in fair trade clothing is especially beneficial as fair trade helps to pay workers fair wages, to ensure safe working conditions and foster sustainable community development for more equitable job opportunities to become more widely available to workers and artisans. Fair trade transfers wealth back to farmers and workers in developing countries who deserve a decent income and decent work, which would prevent workers from having to work in exploitative factories to earn inadequate wages in the first place. Purchasing from consignment, vintage, and thrift stores will recycle clothing that was destined for a landfill and will not contribute to more demand being placed on those larger companies. Overall, purchasing ethically has been made very difficult due to the very cheap prices of fast fashion. But reframing the way that we view shopping as purchasing for longevity, and to get those staple pieces in your closet so you don't have to keep on purchasing more and more, and using that longevity perspective instead of an idea of brevity when you're shopping will have a huge impact on our consumer habits. And also, simply using your voice to inform others about the dangers of the fast fashion industry when you can have a great impact on the consumer habits of the public and of our peers. And we can take it one small step at a time by talking to individual people. Thank you all so much for listening. And thank you, Patrick, again, for sharing so many of the resources in this presentation. And yeah, thank you all so much for listening.
Thank you, Halen, and you're certainly welcome. Good job. Next, we have Natalie Hoffman.
Okay, I'm going to share my screen. Okay, everybody see this?
Yeah.
Okay, so my name is Natalie Hoffman, and today I'm going to be presenting to you global women's empowerment and how fair trade promotes gender equality. So I wanted to start my presentation off by thinking a little bit about what comes to mind when I say promoting women's empowerment. Maybe you think of electing more women in politics or putting women in high-level positions, such as being a CEO. You might think of equal pay or ending workplace harassment. You might even be thinking about lifting women out of poverty or helping domestic abuse victims. Many of us may be thinking in terms of our own experiences or simply the society that we live in, so I want to broaden the term and connect it to fair trade. Would you think of anything different if I asked you about global women's empowerment? And does gender inequality present itself the same throughout the world? The answer is both yes and no, so let's talk about it. First, I want to define disempowerment. It's quite simply empowerment's opposite, meaning to deny power to any given group and as a result, labeling them as inferior. So how are women in the global South disempowered? I've outlined 6 different means of disempowerment to talk about, although there are definitely more, but these are job opportunity, representation, poverty, violence, political inequality, and societal norms. In regards to job opportunity, women who hold a job are more likely to get laid off or experience salary cuts than their male counterparts. This is especially important to the world today as COVID-19 has definitely amplified this. Women may be discriminated against for being employed while having children as well. Furthermore, a large percentage of women work in invisible sectors of the informal economy, meaning that they work in jobs that are not regulated by the government or are considered self-employed. Thus, they don't receive any workers' protections that may provide some level of security against overworking or abuse. Another reason is lack of representation. Despite women producing up to 60 to 80% of the world's food, they are highly underrepresented in political and economic organizations. Women are also more susceptible to poverty and make up 70% of the world's poor. This phenomenon is referred to as the feminization of poverty and connects back to each means of disempowerment listed. Specifically, women are 2.5 times more likely to spend time on unpaid or domestic work than men. They also earn 24% less than men globally, and a majority of women in developing regions have jobs in the informal economy, as explained before. Many women also face sexual harassment or assault without the means to report it, leaving them to either quit or silently suffer. The lack of female representation and leadership in jobs furthers their condition of voicelessness. There is often systemic inequality in regards to political policies that discriminate against women and lessen their economic freedom as well. Laws can deny women the right to own property or land, inherit ownership, or have control over their money. This ties into the last means of disempowerment, which is societal norms regarding gender. A woman's husband or another male relative may legally own the land instead of her. Women are also expected to take care of children and housework instead of participating in the workforce. While they are a crucial part of running the household, they do not receive the same amount of decision-making power and freedom. So how does fair trade fit into this? Gender equality is built into the system of fair trade through its core principles. In Principle 5, the Fair Trade Federation states that members seek to ensure that income is distributed equitably at all times, particularly equal pay for equal work by women and men. Principle 6 states that members cultivate workplaces that empower people to participate in the decisions that affect them. And to specify what directly relates to gender equality, it also says members seek to eliminate discrimination based on gender or marital status. And members also support workplaces free from physical, sexual, psychological, or verbal harassment or abuse. Fair trade is meant to empower all producers and work against unjust systems that exploit them. Now let's talk about how fair trade is working towards this. It is important to acknowledge that the process does not happen overnight, especially when it involves changing fundamental social beliefs, and that putting ideas into practice is not always perfect. However, it is also important to recognize that even small steps towards gender equality on a local scale or within small cooperatives are indicators of success. 54% of senior roles in fair trade organizations are held by women, a much more equal percentage than seen in non-fair trade companies. Organizations such as the Fair Trade Network of Asia and Pacific Producers often focus on investing in women's leadership, training, and education programs. This organization founded a school that focuses on teaching business skills such as finance and negotiation to women, in addition to educating men on how to promote gender equality in their communities. Similar schools have been started in Guatemala, El Salvador, and Cote d'Ivoire, to name a few places. Female graduates have gone on to become teachers themselves, been elected to leadership positions, or started their own committees to represent women. Fair trade scholarships, literacy programs, and free courses have also increased access to education for producers. These schools have empowered women to feel more confident about themselves and given them the tools to create their own means of income. In regards to creating safe working conditions, FTOs implement zero tolerance abuse policies, sometimes paired with educational programs to prevent harassment from happening. The Fair Trade's Growing Women in Coffee program successfully reduced one barrier that stopped women from participating in the workforce by investing in more efficient technology. Biogas stoves significantly reduced the amount of housework to be done, thus providing more opportunities for women to work in fair trade. Furthermore, the building of childcare facilities near workplaces also made it easier for women to participate. The same program produced the first female-grown coffee to be sold in Kenya. While women can't own their own land there, their husbands gifted 50 coffee bushes to their wives. Some men continued giving their wives coffee bushes to maintain giving more economic independence to the women. So why is empowering women so important? This is what Elizabeth from the Kenyan Coffee Cooperative has to say. If a woman is empowered, then the house will also be empowered economically and socially. Studies show giving women economic power gives them the capacity to make more decisions that benefit the family and community as a whole. Women are more likely to use their salary to fund their child's education or invest in their child's health. These choices not only advance the household, but the future as well. Furthermore, projects led by women are more likely to invest in daycares, grocery stores, healthcare, and household objects like washing machines that promote the well-being of an entire community. Data recorded in Latin America suggests that increasing the amount of women in the workplace could decrease poverty levels overall. Women's financial empowerment could also increase the global GDP by $12 trillion, benefiting the economic development of the world. Let's hear about two real stories that had very real impacts. Forgive my pronunciation here. I think it's Zayani. Zaya and her mother are sugarcane farmers from Malawi. Thanks to the fair wages provided by fair trade, her mother was also able to support their family after the passing of their father. She and her sisters were able to afford an education as well. Fair trade has helped not only the Zaya family to become financially independent, but helped the community thrive as well. The Kasanthula Cane Growers Association receives premiums that allowed for the construction of nearby water taps, a primary school, and clinic. She says, now girls are encouraged to go to school, as education is both the right and future for each and every person. We have now learned that being a female doesn't mean you're a failure. Being a female means that you can do everything that boys and men can do. So I too have the right to go to school, the right to get employed, the right to do many things, because I am also human and also capable of those things. Aggie Cole Arthur is a batiker from Ghana who makes fabric art using wax and dye to create different patterns. When her husband went back to school, she became the sole provider and joined the Global Mamas to help her business grow, all while taking care of her daughter and receiving an education as well. Fair trade has enabled her to start her own business and employ other women. She says, to me, prosperity is working hard, improving, and dreaming big. My dreams of my daughter are very big. So to conclude, women's disempowerment may look slightly different on the surface depending on where you are. However, the root problems with gender inequality remain the same. The impact of increasing numbers of women in the workforce carry over to the household, the community, and the world as a whole. Fair trade empowers women to have the necessary freedom and voice to push us towards a better, more equal future for all. The next time you think about what women's empowerment could do, think globally. Thank you to everybody, especially Patrick, Joan, and my sponsor, Mr. Cron.
Thank you, Natalie. Good job. And now finally, we have Emma Ellison.
Okay. Hi, guys. I'm Emma Ellison. I'm a junior, and I'm going to be doing mine on environmental sustainability through fair trade. Let me pull up my screen real quick. Can you all see that?
Yes.
Yes.
So, to kick things off, sustainability is the avoidance of the depletion of natural resources in order to maintain an ecological balance. This basically means that that you're taking advantage of resources that are already available to you in order to not overuse said resource. Now, when being environmentally sustainable, you continue using the natural resources that are currently available so future generations will not have a lack of certain necessary product. Some examples of doing this is recycling clean energy sources like solar panels or using non-toxic products. So looking at trade, the most frequent use of trade in today's world is free trade. So you might be wondering, what is free trade? So it is where the government does not interfere with the trade and does not establish things like tariffs, quotas, or other restrictions. So that basically means that it's almost like a free-for-all with trade. There's not a lot of control that happens there. So because of that, a lot of bigger corporations, like the ones that have been mentioned with the past presentations, often take advantage of that and exploit labor and subject them to poor working conditions and so on. So, So agriculture in our free trade, oh my gosh, sorry, hold on one second. I lost my place. Okay, so the main question now is, how does free trade affect the environment? More specifically, how does it harm the environment? Free trade is all about supply and demand. With the demand growth, resources are exploited in the process of supplying the public. Because of this lack of unhealthy modes of production that expose toxic chemicals and natural gases. Agriculture in our free trade world is one of the greatest stressors for the environment. I will be focusing mainly on agriculture during this presentation. There's a lot of other agriculture is just pretty simple to tackle when looking at it. So I'm focusing on Vietnam. So Vietnam is one of the key coffee producers in the world. It is notorious for spraying. This basically means that the most of the coffee that is consumed is sprayed. Not just the coffee industry that uses pesticides. A majority of larger agricultural companies use pesticides in their crops in order to reach a greater demand and to keep insects off their plants. Over a longer period of time, it's just bad to begin with. Pesticides from the crops eventually find their way into the soil and they eventually find their way into the soil, water, turf, and other vegetations, causing contamination to occur. This contamination not only poisons these supplies, but can kill organisms that rely on these resources like birds, fish, pollinating insects, and plants. The agriculture industry utilizes a lot of energy through these means of production. Because of this, unsustainable energy sources are used and cause an increase in carbon emissions. The increase in carbon emissions causes an influx in greenhouse gases. As you can see in the chart, agriculture is responsible for nearly 1/4 of greenhouse gas emissions throughout the world. This increase in the greenhouse gases contributes to the global warming crisis happening in the world today. Now, I've been talking about how horrible free trade is, and it's a bit of a nasty, negative subject. So let's move on to fair trade and how it benefits the environment. So fair trade follows a set of principles, and one of them is being respectful to the environment. According to the World Fair Trade Organization, companies that are fair trade must maximize the use of raw materials from sustainably managed sources in their ranges, buying locally when possible. They use production technologies to reduce energy consumption and where possible, I lost my place. Okay. And where possible, use renewable energy technologies that minimize greenhouse gas emissions. They seek to minimize the impact of their waste streams on the environment. Fair trade agricultural commodity producers minimize their environmental impact by using organic or low pesticide use production methods wherever possible. When looking at farming through fair trade, any farmer who is in partnership with the companies like the World Fair Trade Organization must use environmentally friendly practices and make an effort to protect the organisms and characteristics of their land. So just being sustainable in their resources and making an effort to not do any destruction to the land that they are working on. Fair trade organizations have established carbon credits. A carbon credit is a permit that allows a company that holds it to emit a certain oxide or other greenhouse gases. One credit permits the emission of a mass equal to 1 ton of carbon dioxide. Carbon credits help regulate energy use of fair trade companies and help decrease the mass emission of carbon dioxide that is typically done in manufacturing and agriculture. So what's the next step? Some simple steps that anyone here can take is reuse, reduce, recycle. That's an easy one. It's not, and you don't even have to purchase fair trade. Just be mindful of how you use your products and also begin to do research into how you purchase your food, because fair trade food and that sort of thing can be somehow a little bit easier to find because it's typically organic and that sort of thing. And find and see if companies that you are supporting are using harmful habits. Cutting those out in general can make a huge difference in your own carbon emission and so on. So buying fair trade is not just something that's, you know, quirky, unusual. It's the futures of the planet as a whole. So is incredibly important to the whole world. Okay, here are my citations, and a big thank you to everyone involved. This has been a great opportunity, especially Patrick and Joan. You guys have been great. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Emma. So I'm going to share my screen again. Well, I didn't do that right. There we go. Everybody see my blue screen again? So we're going to open it up to questions, but I do have a personal note just to start. Thank you, ladies. You all did an amazing job. As I said earlier, I couldn't be more proud of you. You all have taken advantage of every single thing that this opportunity brought you and grabbed it by the horns, so to speak. So now I will open it up to anyone else who would like to ask any questions of them about their presentations. If you'd like to ask them anything about their experience this year, whatever it is that's on your mind, feel free. Just unmute yourself and then ask away. Crickets, crickets.
This is Regina, and I'm wondering if any of these young women can tell any personal stories about how this is affecting their own lives in the way in which they're purchasing products. Are your friends supporting you? Is it hard to do, to overcome the habits of this mass purchasing culture that we live in? So anybody who wants to respond, I'd love to hear from you about real stories from yourselves.
I can
When that-
answer.
Go ahead,
Sorry.
Ella. I'm sorry. I was just going to say, if they ask a question, you have to answer it. So go ahead.
I think that it is difficult to change my habits because I don't necessarily like shopping, but I like putting together outfits. And sometimes it's hard for me to keep up with trends and be fair trade just because a lot of the trends are coming from brands that use fast fashion, and a lot of fast fashion is not fair trade. So that's been super duper hard for me. But luckily, there are a lot of brands that what I found is that there's a lot of brands that aren't necessarily fair trade certified, but if you read enough articles about them, this is like what I try and do is make an informed decision. So I'll read articles about the brand, and I'll look up like keywords like child labor, incidences of factories collapsing, exploitation or abuse of workers that are associated with that brand. And if I don't find anything, then I go ahead and give it the okay. And also they have statements of like, we make sure that this type of environment is created in our factories. And there's a lot of great websites that rate brands on how close to fair trade standards they are. So I use those a lot, and that's really helped. But yeah.
Thank you, Ella.
Anyone else want to tackle that one?
I can chime in. I think it definitely has been difficult, especially kind of navigating like social situations with our peers. I feel like it's kind of normal at this age as like teenage girls to, go to the mall, maybe go shopping after school, things like that. And it is kind of difficult to navigate that situation and not actively participate, but also not wanting to like put a buzzkill on the rest of the group. The way that I've kind of gone about navigating that is if someone asks me like, oh, like, why aren't you buying anything? I like to kind of go on my little spiel, if you will, and be like, this is kind of what's happening. Like, here are some examples of what this brand, like, for example, like Forever 21, here are some examples of like when Forever 21 has been caught using child labor. And I personally don't want to contribute to the demand placed on that company. And I'm not going to judge you if you do, but I want to help you make an educated decision as well. So yeah, that's kind of what I like to do if anyone else has anything to add.
Thank you, Halen.
Yeah, I was just going to add that, like Halen said, it's sort of difficult going to the mall with friends. I think like Goodwill has become a lot more popular, so we'll go thrifting instead, which is a really good alternative. But going to the mall for me it's never been a great experience just because I've been like plus size my whole life. So it's like trying to combat that, trying to find cute clothes that are big enough to fit me, but then also trying to find clothes that are fair trade and don't exploit the workers that have made them. It's become like extra hard, but I just think at the end of the day, it's so important to do so. And I'm going to take those extra steps, like Ella was saying, to do research and I love going thrifting. Almost everything I wear is from thrift stores now. And like, I found enjoyment in shopping. So it's almost like fair trade has allowed me to find enjoyment instead of going to the mall and being, feeling left empty-handed. So
Thank you, Catherine.
Anyone else want to tackle that? I'll just chime in just a little bit because one of the things, it's a quote from one of our participants last year, and the thing that is so true that I've put together is once you know and once you see, you can't unknow and unsee. Once you're informed, you can't go back, and you have to make your choice on what to do with that information. And you have choices. You can ignore it. you can act on it. So I think these young women are great examples of those who are making it part of their lifestyle. Any other questions? Any proud parents, any sponsors want to chime in about anything that's going on here? All right, well, we'll move on then. Again, thank you all for coming here tonight. Thank you, ambassadors. Personal note, you guys have been awesome. It's always hard for me to say goodbye at the end of the year. I always do get a little emotional about it because I get attached. But it's been a joy this year to walk this journey with you. And hopefully you won't go that too far away. I do have a couple of other announcements coming up next month. Our Fair Trade Explorer night will be Fair Trade and COVID. We're going to have some guest speakers from a couple of our artisan groups from Ghana and India who are going to be talking about COVID-19 and its effect on the artisan groups and how they have adapted and changed. So that should be a very interesting night. June 17th at 6:30. Basically the same format as we're doing tonight for those of you who are new here this evening. And then just know we're here on Frankfurt Avenue if you want to come see us. Our ambassadors are now advocates. They're professionals here. They're our volunteers. They know how everything works here. So if you know them personally, let them twist your arm to come see us. And, you know, we'd love to have you come shop with us. But, you know, if you drop by, ask for me and I'll give you the personal tour as well. Thank you all for coming and have a good evening. Thank you, ladies. You all did an amazing job. Amazing.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Patrick. Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Appreciate hearing from you.
You guys did a great job. Thank you for sharing everything with us.